Are
get it
there a
on the
lot more
NHS.
breast implants? Because I would think of, like Texas or California to be the land of breast implants, but is it actually the UK?
It is. It is definitely. It's
Whoa.
available on the NHS. You can Google it and find out. But I
Are they
mean,
getting all their teeth fixed now? We are back, louder with Crowder. This next guest probably will be controversial to some of you, though we've been going back and forth on Twitter for a while. Mr. Watson I just say Mr. Watson because his first name is so English and easy to forget. But I just know Mr. Watson from Infowars.com. Thank you for being with us, sir.
good to be here, Stephen.
Now the first name is Paul, right?
It's Paul Joseph Watson. Yeah.
Paul Joseph Watson. Okay, well, it's a proper English name. I was going to be like Peter, Paul, and then it would just start the interview off on a terrible, terrible tangent. So, okay, you have an accent. I'm guessing Polish.
I have an accent. I mean, everybody in the UK would say that you had an accent, even though there are literally 50 accents in the UK. But
This is
we
true.
don't tend to obsess about them as much as Americans. So it's not
That's
really
true until I hear someone from England who's not from Liverpool hear someone from Liverpool speak. Then everyone makes fun of the Liverpool guy.
Well, yeah, people make fun of different local dialects. I mean, I'm from the north, so I would normally be quite broad. So I've tempered my accent over the years to sound more kind of, middle of the road, but I still have an accent. So
Well, Liverpool is hilarious. I remember there was a fighter named Terry Edom, and he was in the UK. It was a fight in Manchester, and when he got up
yeah,
on the mic, he said, "I just want to thank the fans for the fans there," and he had his mouthpiece in, and he couldn't understand what he was saying, and everyone in England was laughing. It wasn't so. Apparently, Liverpool is like your Cleveland.
no, there are some accents in the UK that even I can't understand, having been here for 30 years. So
All right, that
I
explains it.
sympathise.
Okay, now that we've gotten completely off topic, okay, so right off the bat, now we agree on a lot of things. We don't agree on everything. You work for a controversial site, obviously, Infowars.com. Pretty conspiratorial. Now, when I follow you on Twitter, you seem quite reasonable. How far along the, I guess, sort of like the chemtrail, fluoride in your tap path would you say you are versus you're just a libertarian who's mistrustful of government?
I would say I'm more leaning libertarian, mistrustful of government. What I will say is that over the years, the conspiracy crowd have become more and more extreme to the point where every single incident is staged or a false flag or this
Right.
didn't really happen. And that tends to get quite a lot of traction on YouTube still amongst that audience. But I tend to shy away from that because
Right.
I see that a lot of those people are basically mentally ill, but they have their own have their own audience. But I try and stick to what we can prove, what we can document, because what we can actually prove and document is pretty shocking enough.
Right.
I
Yeah.
stick to that in terms of geopolitics and domestic events. So, I differ with quote conspiracy policy chemtrail issue. I'm not old on. I've read a lot about that. One side, I was a fully paid up member of the chemtrail cult, but having read more widely and having seen that chemtrails were being reported back in the 50s, 60s, it's not a recent issue. That's an example of something that I've moderated on. And as I said, there are numerous issues which we can prove, which are manifestly provable. And I tend to stick to that information. And more recently, the whole culture war stuff. So,
Right.
Infowars is a broad church. It's not like, Alex Jones rules with an iron fist and he tells everybody what to do. We basically get carte blanche to talk about and write about what we want.
Right.
So it's a very broad church, and there are people with different opinions who
Well,
work for Infowars.
right.
So it's quite, we're given quite a free reign.
Well, and I noticed that with you. I mean, you deal with feminism a lot, which we'll get into. But, I did a video on the LAPD shooting, right? And a lot of the sort of, there really is neo-libertarianism, too. A lot of people like to act as though there's no extremists in that camp, but there are. And a lot of them just immediately said, "You're supporting the police state." And I was pretty clear in the video that I'm not, but this was a case where when the evidence came through, these were cops who were maybe protecting their life, or we have to wait until. And you even said, "Hey, this is reasonable," which is just not something you see from a lot of other libertarian publications. It just seems like you process information in a way that, you process information. Period.
Well, exactly. the issue of police brutality is one that we focused on for, more than a decade, and it
Right.
is a real problem.
Sure.
But again, we draw it back to the fact that you cannot solve this issue of innocent, quote, unarmed, which in most cases that they draw attention to is not the case, but black people being killed by police, by not also focusing on the very real problem of criminality and violence within the black community, which is what these Black Brunch and Black Lives Matter protesters routinely fail to do. So if you actually drill down into the statistics, Justice Department, FBI, which is, what I've done on my videos, a couple
Right.
of them of which got over 1 million views, 50% of homicides in the United States are committed by black people, even though they only make up 13% of the population. So the 9/11 calls on that per capita statistical evidence are obviously going to come from the black areas, which is likely to lead to more violent confrontations with police. And other, racist facts which completely, dispel and disprove this whole Black Lives Matter narrative,
Sure.
such as blacks commit 7 times more violent crime compared to whites per capita. So
Right. Well, I don't even necessarily want to get into. Obviously, I mean, people can go. You can follow. Now, is it Prison Planet? Is your Twitter handle?
Yeah.
Prison Planet is his Twitter handle, and he has this information. He's releasing it all the time. I don't want to get too far off into the weeds there, but I think the main point is that's very important is it's liberals love to say that conservatives are libertarians. They're simple-minded. It is a gross oversimplification of the issue to just say, hands up, don't shoot, Black Lives Matter, and to act as though all white cops are going out to simply shoot black kids, which, if that were the case, would be morally reprehensible, and someone would crack down on it. And that's where I get off the conspiracy boat with a lot of people. I'm going like, really? If there was a spaceship that landed there, wouldn't one person come forward and go, hey, these guys are all lying? So it's at a certain point you have to go, what's the more reasonable conclusion here? And I think you do that well. Listen, we're going to have to go to a break, but I want to come right back with Paul Watson from Infowars.com. Stay tuned. And we're back with Mr. Paul Watson, editor at Infowars.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Prison Planet. So we were talking about the police brutality earlier, and that's something we could talk about all day. But I have talked about this, and I've noticed that you've done some of the best videos on YouTube. I highly recommend people go watch them. For people listening terrestrially, go to louderwithcrowder.com. We'll have an annotation in this video interview where you can click it and go to his videos. This is something that I've said. And then you have the floor. There are a few winning issues right now for conservatives, libertarians, okay? They're losing a lot of ground. Guns, there's been an overreach to take away people's guns, and there are more people who are pro-Second Amendment than not. Free speech, Islam, now people are going, okay, there's a little bit of a trend here, and most importantly, I think feminism has overreached to a point that they've worn out their welcome with an entire generation of young women even who would be accepting of the general precepts, but they've gotten so shrill, so loud, so bombastic that it's been rejected on a cultural level. Would you say I'm close to being on the money, or why not?
You're very close to being on the money because, less than a quarter of American women identify as feminists. And routinely now in the media, we see Hollywood actresses saying, well, yes, I support equality, I support women's rights, but I don't consider myself a feminist. Of course, they're attacked ceaselessly by third wave radical feminists whenever they make that stance, which proves again that radical third wave feminism has very little to do with equality and very little to do with the original first wave, second wave feminism, which was about property rights and the right to vote. So now we see feminists increasingly getting irate over these ridiculous issues like, manspreading, the jazz hands issue, which was a big controversy in the UK recently.
It just sounds silly to say. I mean, it's silly to even say this is the jazz hands issue. It's like these buzz phrases now just point out how silly the discussion is.
But, the point is that I get emails from actual feminists who work in North Africa and in the Middle East against FGM, female genital mutilation, and they, express their horror about how third wave feminists are representing women's rights because they pick on these ridiculous issues, Shirtgate, the comet scientist who wore a sexy woman on his shirt, and that was the big controversy.
I like that
So I want to get one of those shirts as well. But again, it's third wave feminism has completely divorced itself from the women's rights movement.
Right.
They don't seem to realize that, and it's like they're doubling down. And then, the bastard child of third wave feminism is this men's rights movement, which in its own way is kind of extremist. So they kind of play off of each other.
Right.
But my issue with feminism is that they're complete rampant hypocrites. They consistently ignore genuine women's rights issues, which at the moment emerge out of countries like Saudi Arabia and Iraq. They passed a law in Saudi Arabia last year where female drivers are treated as terrorists. They passed a law in Iraq where rape against wives in Iraq has been legalized. Not a word, complete tumbleweeds from feminists on both of those issues, which strikes at the root of the fact that third wave feminism does not care about women. It cares about social engineering, subverting culture, and cultural Marxism, which is what you've talked about.
Exactly. And I do want to say I would be in full support of treating teenage girl drivers as registered terrorists. Or you know what? At the very least, they should be treated as registered sex offenders, where they have to notify everyone on the road of their past, their checkered vehicle past. Because, man, I've been nearly killed 4 times today. 4 times today by a girl texting. Completely irrelevant to your point, but you do bring up the cultural Marxism. And that's a good point. Which actually kind of ties into right now, right? The Indiana and Arkansas. Now, people try and say it's about hate versus love. It's not, and the gender issues really do get pretty complex here in this case, to a point where I'm trying to pick my words carefully. Let's talk about this since it's topical. But the fact is, feminism started out to blur gender lines, to essentially say that fundamentally men and women are interchangeable. Now, not just in a term of rights, but I grew up in public school in Canada, where they said, well, men can do everything women can do, and women can do everything men can do. It's scientifically untrue, and it's also just, I don't see how that's productive to bring children up that way, but same thing happens when you deal with, let's say, the same-sex marriage issue. I'm not giving an opinion here, but if you've said that, well, 2 mommies provide the exact same relationship that 2 daddies can and vice versa, you've removed gender lines, and then you have these same people who have a problem with men dressing up as women going into the restroom. Either it all has to be okay, none of it's okay, or we have to agree that there's a line somewhere. So right now with this issue in Indiana and Arkansas, as a libertarian, do you see that as a love versus hate issue, or as a legitimate infringement on religious freedom for private businesses?
I see it as the latter, because if you follow the argument to its logical conclusion, it's using the force of the state to compel people who to do business with.
Right.
And, that's at the heart of everything that opposes feminism, is this idea that, they have to impose thought control and they have to police free speech because it might offend somebody, it might upset somebody, which again is exemplified in this whole fat pride body acceptance movement, which is a bizarre new branch of third wave feminism. So now in the UK, journalists, in this case Katie Hopkins, are being reported to the police for questioning why people are overeating and becoming obese and becoming fat. Because that is the new banner, celebratory image of feminism, is body acceptance. So I've made videos there's a 17-minute video on YouTube that I made about this. And they're using this intersectional argument, which argues that everything is oppression and that every form of oppression emerges from within the culture. So now fat shaming is equated with racism and sexism, despite the fact that, people can't choose their race, they can't choose their sex. They do choose to be obese, they choose to overeat. But feminists, again, they like to dispense with any sense of self-responsibility. So now we even have experts like Dr. Sarah Jackson in the UK saying, quote, mocking the obese should be illegal. So again, it goes back to that point of feminists and social justice warriors and leftists relying on the power of the state at gunpoint to force people to accept their views and to have this idea of freedom, which is merely freedom to do as we tell you
Right.
at the force of gunpoint.
Well, a couple of points. What I find ironic, and I don't hear a lot of people talk about this with the feminist movement and the body image issue. I'm going, here's the thing. Guys marry fat chicks. Guys marry skinny chicks. Feminists need to understand your husband wants to see you naked. Okay? He doesn't expect you to be perfect. Those images you see on magazines are usually, or certainly runway models. My wife was a runway model for years. They're dressed up, made up, and airbrushed by gay men. So if you want to take up the unrealistic expectations, don't take it up with straight guys who are taking the untouched photo of Kate Upton and going, she's pretty hot, and then looking at an untouched photo of Sienna Miller and just the same thing, she's pretty hot, or Sandra Bullock and saying we find women attractive, period, in all different shapes and forms. The irony is it's an industry, the same liberal industry that would claim, fat shaming should be illegal. I would say one thing. I would take it one step further on the gay wedding cake to Arkansas, Indiana issue. The government does have the right in the states to say you can't discriminate based on race. For example, if Kanye West comes in and says, hey, I want a birthday cake, I can't say no because you're black or an idiot. But this is an issue where actually the government wants to legislate forcing businesses to engage in specific activities. If Kanye West comes in and says, hey, I want you to make a cake with my lyrics, gold digger, broke N-word, I can say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with that activity. No, the government's saying we're not even talking about race or gender or sexual orientation. We're talking about an activity and forcing you to engage in that. That's my issue with it.
Well, it would be the equivalent of, a photographer, a wedding photographer being forced to go and photograph a gay wedding. I mean, do they get the choice not to say that they want to do that? It's how far you push it. But I mean, on the fat shaming, they, like top feminists like Naomi Wolf, who is pretty prominent.
I've got a great story about her, by the way, but continue.
She argues that this whole idea that men are attracted to thin, fertile, attractive, pretty women is a grand conspiracy perpetrated by the beauty and cosmetics industry. That's her argument. She's written books about it. She's given speeches about it.
Like, we all had a secret meeting behind their back. Like, guys, let's just use this group. We don't even like boobs and butts. I know, it'll drive them nuts. I mean, men have always been attracted to certain traits in women.
And it's scientific. You can drill down into the biology, waist to hip ratio.
Sure.
It's not to say that men are attracted to anorexic women.
No.
Many people are attracted to curves. That's fine. But there's a difference between curves and morbid obesity. Right. So for her to argue that this has been invented, contrived by the beauty cosmetics industry, it completely contradicts basic human experience and actual science, which proves that hip to waist ratio is the main attractive factor for men.
Before the science test, let's take Lena Dunham as an example.
But, feminists don't like science.
They don't like science. But even before the science test, let's take Lena Dunham. There's the eyeball test. And she's the one who writes pieces in her own show to be naked. It's not like, oh, well, I guess if it's in context, I guess if it's for the part and she's being pressured by a writer, she is the writer. She's going naked all the time, like nonstop naked. And she says, well, I'm just going to change the notion of what beauty is. It's not, because you don't pass the eyeball test. You're also a horrible human being, Lena Dunham, but you cannot make people attracted to you. It's not some societal construct. You're unattractive to most men. The people have voted. They've given you the Caesar thumbs down. Anyway, I'm a sexist.
But, I mean, this is the thing. It's generally true that a lot of feminists, and you can look at the most prominent ones on YouTube, are mainly overweight, unattractive, black-rimmed glasses wearing harpies. That stereotype is generally true. So how much of their grievance is based in the fact that they can't attract men, or that they've been screwed over by men in the past because they're not very attractive to men? I mean, that's got to be an issue. That has to be an issue with their grievance and where it stems from.
It's true. It's a good point. I've never... we're getting into anecdotal evidence, and this is entirely anecdotal. I've not met a woman who's really had her crap together and been in a very successful relationship they were happy with, who hated men like feminists hate men. I've never met one ever.
All the women I know, really smart women, whether they're attractive or not, they don't concur with feminism. They hate feminism. So it seems to be these kind of relationship dropouts that really glom onto this, seize upon it as a social justice warrior cause, when some of it is based in their own personal grievances. And I guess, you could apply the same criticism to the men's rights movement, not so much because they're not as prominent, but
Right.
I think it's definitely a factor.
I think it definitely is. And we will bring you on actually after the break because you're so lovely. And I want to listen to you more. Mr. Paul Watson after the break, louder with Crowder. We are back with Mr. Paul Watson, Infowars.com. Again, not what you would think this guy. We talked about this early on in the interview. We were talking about feminism. Here's one thing, too. We'll go into the transgender stuff in a second. I bought Cosmo. I bought a Cosmo. Okay, first, do you want to hear my Naomi Wolf story?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. You're the guest, but I'm telling you the story. So I'm on a panel, and Naomi Wolf was there. This is on when I was working at Fox News, and I think it was maybe Fox Business. And she's there, and I know who she is. But I also know she has an incredible ego. Let's be honest. It's Naomi Wolf. So I play like I have no idea who she is. And she goes, so, oh, yeah, my name is Steven. I do videos, and I'm a contributor. I said, so what do you do? She goes, I'm Naomi Wolf. I said, oh, okay. So what do you do, Naomi? And she says, I'm a writer. I write on women's issues. Now, again, keep in mind, I know exactly who she is. And they're counting down. We are on in 10, 9, 8. And I look at her, I go, oh, so like Cosmo? And you're on live. And she was fuming that someone would assume it. And it was just sometimes you do a little bit of that mental warfare. I knew who she was. So if you're watching Naomi, I knew who you were. Just wanted to screw with you a little bit. But I will say this. So that leads to Cosmo. I bought this Cosmo because it had something on the cover that was about feminism. It says 80% of women said no when asked, do you believe that if a woman is regretful of a sexual experience after the case, that it is sexual assault? 80% said no, which means that 20% said yes.
Yeah.
20% believe that if you're a bad lover and they regret it, you've sexually assaulted them. That blew my mind.
No, this is a thing, Stephen, amongst feminists. It's called rape by fraud. They actually tried to introduce a law in New Jersey which said if somebody lied about their age, employment history, salary, when they slept with a woman, that afterwards, even years later, the woman could go back and charge them with rape, the equivalent punishment, and they could spend up to 20 years in prison. And there's actually a woman that's pushing this. She's wrote a book about it. She's quite prominent now. It's called Rape by Fraud. So if you lied before sex, they now want to treat you as a rapist. If you merely lied about your age, your salary, anything, basically.
What if you just for men your beard? Is that considered enough?
Well, she demanded that before women sleep with men, they would need to provide proof of address, driver's license, passport, proof of employment before any, sexual activity takes place.
You don't even need that to vote.
So, I made a video about that. So again, there are so many different strands of third wave feminism that are batshit insane. We have to bleep that out.
We might have to bleep that out. I'll have my producer here bleep that out for terrestrial. I don't know what the rule is because perhaps since it's attached to bat, it's not considered scatological in a human sense. Okay, so let's go to the transgender thing because I spoke about this. We spoke about this on Twitter, and I did some videos on this. Firstly, let me say that nothing said here, and I think I speak for both of us, is spoken from a position of hate or wanting any kind of harm to come to someone, regardless of their personal sexual choices or orientation or race. Now, the transgender thing, Planet Fitness is an example, obviously recently in the news. You're a libertarian, you're English, so people would assume you line up a specific way. Where do you line up on the cultural issue right now, this honestly phenomenon of transgenderism?
I agree with people doing whatever they want to do in the privacy of their own homes and behaving however they want to behave within the law. What I don't agree with is, again, using the state at the end of a barrel of a gun to force me to agree with what they want, or to force me to pay taxes for transgender people to have operations on the National Health Service in Britain. because that's how it is. We have socialized healthcare in Britain, the NHS. We all pay our taxes to fund this healthcare system.
Do you still live there, by the way?
Yeah, I live just outside of London.
How
and
unpopular are you?
Listen, I've been to parties and argued about this, merely saying I don't think I should have to pay for transgender people to have sex change operations on the NHS through my taxes. If they want to pay for it themselves, more power to them. Do whatever you like. I don't think I should have to pay for it. Just like I don't think I should have to pay for breast enhancement surgery, which I do also. So I've been to parties where people will literally get in my face and scream and then run away because they say that, these people have emotional issues. They might get depressed if they don't have a sex change. So I should be happy to pay for it. And if I don't, I'm hateful.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
I also don't believe it's my job, even if you don't want to chop off your John Thomas and you're depressed, it's not my job to fix your depression. So I don't even agree with the premise on which they would base their argument. It's one of those issues. Again, it goes back to feminism and then the same-sex issue. I'm not saying I line up either way wholeheartedly on any. They're individual issues on a case-by-case basis, but it is the blending, the blurring, the elimination of gender lines. And once you do that, legally, it's very hard to argue the contrary. And that's kind of where we are. I mean, how do you argue? How do you say same-sex marriage absolutely, and then say, oh, by the way, if you're a man and you dress up as a woman, you're not allowed to go in the women's restroom. Legally, you don't have a leg to stand on once you've gone that far along the trail.
Yeah, I mean, with the transgender issue, transgenderism was once defined as a mental disorder. Now, you can debate whether that's the case or not,
Sure.
But as recently as 2012, in the DSM, the American Psychiatric Association manual, transgenderism was only removed in 2012. So if you define that as a mental disorder up until that point, what conditions which are currently defined as mental disorders will in the future be accepted as normal? There are people with body integrity identity disorder. These are people who feel that their own limbs should be detached from their bodies, and it makes them depressed if they're not. So should I have to be forced by the state to pay through my taxes for people to have their limbs removed on the National Health Service, socialized healthcare, on the NHS, because they might get depressed, they might commit suicide? So how far do you push this philosophical argument down the line, and
Right.
what kind of mental disorders that are defined as that now will later, the taxpayer be forced to pay for? That's the problem.
We've got to get you to America, man. I feel bad for you out there. Who are your friends? No, but you're right, and I do ask this too: if we're not going to call it a disorder, are there any other conditions, personal choices that involve body mutilation required that we don't call a disorder? Is there any other, honestly, tweet me at @SCrowder. I would like to know, is there any other condition that we consider normal that requires for that normal to happen, gross body mutilation? I can't think of any. Can you?
No, but the argument they make is that a few transgender people per year commit suicide because they're depressed, so that's why we should pay for it, because it's an important treatment.
Yeah.
I don't think I should be forced to pay for it by the state.
Right.
If they want to pay for it themselves. Breast enhancement surgery, same argument. People can get that on the NHS. It's free. It's not free because I pay for it, the taxpayer, but they can get it on the NHS.
Are there a lot more breast implants? Because I would think of, like Texas or California to be the land of breast implants, but is it actually the UK?
It is definitely. It's available on the NHS. You can Google it and find out. But I mean,
are they getting all their teeth fixed now? I'm sorry, it's a stereotype, but it's a genuine question.
That is a stereotype that persists. I can't say it's very extant now.
Okay, all right, that's fair. I just had to ask.
I don't have to worry about that because I've got perfect teeth.
You've got perfect teeth. You look like you should be on the WB network. Or wait, no, it's the CW now. I don't know. One of those pretty guys.
Well, I mean, you mentioned who are your friends? I mean, it is a genuine issue. Being a conservative, a young conservative. Maybe I would describe myself as a conservatarian, but we can use the term conservative. being a conservative for a young person in the UK is like being a homosexual in the 1950s. You have to stay in the closet because it's a hostile environment. It's like I said, people will literally scream in my face if I express any viewpoint which is anti. You know, it's like imagine the whole of America being like the most liberal areas of California. That's how bad it is.
Well, that's where I was raised in Quebec. Plus, you've got the French to deal with. But you just said homosexual. Is that still allowed in England? Because it's not here.
Really?
Yeah, it's considered hate. It's considered discriminatory. You're supposed to. Is it? I don't know if it's gay or queer, but I know homosexual is considered offensive.
I think queer is frowned upon more than homosexual in the United Kingdom. So
oh, definitely not here. You cannot say homosexual. We're gonna get letters. Really? Yeah. Well, it just goes to show we're bridging this cultural divide, Paul. So we appreciate it. So okay, we have to have you back sometime soon. Where can people best find you if they want to find some of your glorious work, sir?
The YouTube channel is YouTube/Prison Planet Live, and it's at Prison Planet on Twitter. Those are the best places.
There you go. And send him a tweet to keep him company out in the lonely, lonely liberal UK where everyone's out to kill him. Got to be careful with the Muslim thing too, man. I had some vacations planned out there, and I don't go with the fatwa on my head. So keep your head down. Stay safe.
Okay, thanks, Stephen.
All right, thank you, Senor Watson. If you like this interview, subscribe by clicking my face or watching this previous video next to me. It's free, and if not, an English boy won't get dental insurance.